Most men do not go broke because they never made money. They go broke because they built a life too weak to survive the money leaving. That is the part the world does not study. The world studies income, applause, access, the visible shine of a man rising. But ruin rarely begins in what can be seen. It begins in structure, in the hidden mathematics of appetite, in the habits a man excuses while the harvest is still good, in the small surrender of discipline, in the private belief that because he has entered abundance, he has somehow escaped consequence. Joe was one of those men the world admires quickly. Competent, gifted, sharp. The kind of man who did not beg life for value. He produced it. He designed desire. Shoes, bags, clothing pieces, products for brands, startups, companies trying to look more refined than they were. Joe had an eye. Not taste alone, vision. He could look at a rough concept and see its final form. He understood shape, texture, detail, luxury, the psychology of wanting. He knew how to make an object feel expensive before it was ever produced. That kind of skill does not stay hidden forever. And for a season, the ledger rewarded him. Before that season, however, Joe knew hunger. He knew tired rooms, weak bulbs, late revisions, praised work with delayed payment, the humiliation of being gifted and underfunded at the same time. He knew what it meant to have vision without capital. And hardship, when it does not break a man, usually sharpens him. Joe was sharpened, so he worked. While others rested, he worked. While others complained, he learned. While others drifted away from their own potential, Joe kept delivering. Slowly, his reputation began to move. One client led to another. One project opened the next door. A shoe concept led to a bag line. A bag line led to apparel direction. A temporary assignment became a retained relationship. His ratings rose. His reviews remained strong. His portfolio gained weight. His confidence became earned. And in the economy of freelancing, reputation becomes currency before money ever does. Soon, Joe was no longer chasing work the way desperate beginners do. Work began to find him. Brands reached out first. Founders called directly. Fashion labels wanted his eye. Small companies wanted his touch because he could make them appear larger, cleaner, more premium, more credible. Then the money came. Not in drops, in waves. The kind of money that changes posture. The kind that makes a man feel history is finally correcting itself. Some months, Joe earned what respected managers earned, then what senior executives earned, then more than men whose titles once intimidated him. And because he had suffered before, success did not feel like indulgence. It felt like justice. That is where the trap opened. Not in greed, in self-reward.
Joe looked at the life he had survived and decided he had earned softness. A better apartment, a better wardrobe, a better phone, better furniture, better meals, better neighborhoods, better standards for what ordinary life should now feel like. And one by one, the upgrades arrived. Nothing obscene, nothing theatrical. That is what makes the trap so effective. It did not feel like recklessness. It felt like arrival. Soon, Joe's life carried that visible shine the world mistakes for security. Neighbors noticed, friends noticed, strangers would have noticed too. His house looked better, his shoes looked better, his rent looked better. His life had that polished glow that makes lesser observers say, he has made it.
And in one sense, he had. He had made money, made progress, made visible advancement. But he had not made shelter. That was the part no one saw, least of all Joe. Then came the next decision, the more dangerous one. He moved. A larger city, a finer city, a more expensive city, a city where ambition moved faster and money vanished faster with it. His new rent was nearly 10 times what he used to pay. 10 times. But in his mind, the logic felt clean. His work had grown. His exposure had grown. His income had grown. His taste had grown. His environment should rise with his level. That is how ruin enters a man's house. Rarely with a scream, often with logic. Soon, convenience became normal. Premium living became normal. Luxury stopped feeling occasional and became routine. Joe did not see himself as foolish. He saw himself as a man finally living in proportion to his labor. But a reward taken before the foundation is secured is not a prize. It is deferred pain. Joe built a life that required continued peak earnings simply to remain comfortable. He was no longer merely living. He was maintaining a performance, and every performance eventually sends an invoice. Then another force entered his life, the pressure to multiply. Once a man begins to earn well, the world immediately begins whispering to him, do not just earn, invest. Do not let money sit, make it work, multiply, expand, accelerate. And on the surface, this sounds wise, but wisdom placed in the hands of a man who does not understand the machinery beneath it becomes another form of danger. Joe was a creator, a designer, a builder of products. He was not deeply formed in finance, risk, or investment structure. But because he now earned like a man of means, he felt pressure to move like one too. So, he outsourced his judgment. That is what many men do when income outruns self-knowledge. He met polished advisors, traders with charts, men with expensive watches and smooth timing, men who spoke in confident abstractions as though complexity itself were proof of truth. Joe gave money here, then there, thousands to one promise, more to another, funds placed not on evidence but on tone, presentation, and confidence. He did not slow down enough. He did not inspect deeply enough. He did not ask the plain, humiliating questions that protect a serious man from expensive embarrassment. Because many successful men would rather lose money than admit ignorance, and pride is rarely cheap. If a man cannot explain clearly where his money is going, he is not investing, he is surrendering. Joe thought he was planting seeds. But many of those seeds were being dropped into soil he had never tested. And while he was doing this, other leaks were multiplying in silence. Subscriptions, premium habits, soft luxuries, image-based costs, recurring conveniences repeated so often they no longer felt like decisions. That is how erosion works. Not always through catastrophe, often through permission. Then the world shifted, as it always does. Far away first, then closer, then everywhere. War, factory slowdowns, supply chain strain, production delays, global friction entering private lives through invisible channels. Many of Joe's clients depended on overseas production, especially in China and other manufacturing regions. So, the disruption reached him gradually. Projects paused, collections delayed, orders froze. Clients began to repeat the same phrases in different clothing. Let's wait. We are on hold. We cannot proceed yet. Production is uncertain. At first, Joe did not panic.
freelancing had taught him that slow seasons happen. He assumed this was weather. Temporary, passing, manageable. A few weeks, perhaps a month, maybe 2. But the pause did not lift. It stretched. Weeks became months. Months became half a year. For 6 months, the river that had been feeding Joe's life slowed almost to nothing. And that is when the true audit began. Because a flood can disguise weakness, but drought exposes design. Joe tried to manage. He stretched what remained, delayed what he could, cut corners, rearranged obligations, promised himself recovery was near. But lifestyle is merciless. Rent does not care about optimism. Bills do not care about narrative. Luxury does not sympathize with interrupted cash flow. The life Joe had built kept demanding to be fed. And this is the cruelty of a life inflated too early. When income slows, the appetite does not slow with it. It keeps asking. Then Joe turned to what he believed was his hidden strength: the investments, the trader, the backup plans, the structures he assumed had been growing quietly out of sight. At least something should answer now, he thought. At least the seeds I planted should return. So he reached out, and the truth arrived in stages. First excuses, then delays, then evasions, then silence. The trader had lost the money. Another investment was under review. Another tied up. Another delayed. Another dissolved into smoke and language. And in a cruel season, Joe discovered that what he called structure was often assumption in a tailored suit. He sat in his expensive apartment, surrounded by proof of visible success, and felt cold. Not physically, structurally. That is a colder thing. It is one thing to suffer when you have never had much. It is another entirely to earn more than people admire, live better than people envy, and still discover that one interruption can expose how little foundation you actually built. That truth reduced him. Joe looked around. The furniture remained beautiful. The city lights remained beautiful. The devices polished. The clothes expensive. But none of them could buy peace. None of them could negotiate with consequence. None of them could stand between him and the bill that arrives when image outgrows structure. For the first time in years, Joe saw his life without decoration. He had flow, but no reservoir. Status, but no stability. Appearance, but not enough shelter. Movement, but not security. A storm does not create weakness. It reveals the place where strength was assumed but never built. Remember that.
If the storm breaks a man, sometimes the storm was not extraordinary. Sometimes the construction was poor. Joe then faced the hardest part: shame. Not public shame first, private shame. The shame of stepping backward. The shame of saying, "I cannot afford this." The shame of admitting that the man the world admired had been privately fragile all along. But once he stopped lying to himself, something changed. He became lighter. Not richer, not glamorous, lighter. Because truth wounds once, pretense wounds daily. So Joe began to cut expenses, subscriptions, comfort habits, image costs, invisible leaks. He let the admired version of himself die. He studied what he had once ignored, read what he had once delegated, asked the questions he had once been too proud to ask. And in that late education, he learned a law many men learn only after loss. Outsourcing responsibility does not remove responsibility. Trust is not a strategy. Hope is not a system. Confidence is not due diligence.
Joe had to become a student again, not only of money, of character, because money problems often reveal character weaknesses already present: impatience, pride, image addiction, comfort dependence, the refusal to prepare for uncertainty while the harvest is strong. These flaws are quiet when income is loud, but the moment the money slows, they begin to speak. Joe rebuilt, quietly, as all serious rebuilding is done. Not for applause, not for audience, not for performance. Quietly. He lived in a place that was enough, not impressive. He learned the mathematics of his own life, saved with intention, stopped treating desire like instruction, stopped calling indulgence wisdom simply because he could afford it for a season. And slowly, the anxiety that had once hidden behind polished surfaces began to leave him. Because peace does not come from shine, it comes from margin, from preparedness, from breathing room, from knowing that if the world shakes, your life will not immediately come apart in its hands. So let the record show. High income is a gift, but retention is discipline. Status is vapor. Stability is stone. The world will always praise what shines, but the storm has never cared about shine. The storm only asks what is anchored. Joe earned more, but for a long time he remained broke. Not in appearance, in foundation. And foundation is what life tests in every man eventually. So inspect your structure, not your image, not your applause, not the costume you wear before other people. Your structure. Cut the ego, study the leak, respect uncertainty, build before you decorate, store before you celebrate, strengthen the wall before the weather changes, and above all, do not confuse admiration with safety. Many men are decorated, very few are fortified. Be one of the fortified, because winter keeps no appointment book, and yet it always arrives. Balance your ledger accordingly.